A very warm welcome to all of you to the webinar today on Ovulation Induction Protocols from Beginning till End. On behalf of Jacksonpal Pharmaceuticals Limited, makers of Cystelia M and Lycoret Prex Sachet, I am Dr. Vipin Tyagi, along with my teammates, Dr. Deepika Chhabra and Mr. Amit Saxena. Thank you, Dr. Seema Mittal, President, Rewari Obs and Gynae Society, Convener and Moderator for organizing this ICOG accredited webinar supported by Lalita Memorial Hospital Infertility Center, Rewari. Current webinar is a part of series 7 Days 7 Scholar A to Z of Infertility every Friday. Since International Adolescent Health E-conference is beginning from tomorrow, that is Friday, so we are organizing this webinar on Thursday. Upcoming webinars of this series will be held on Friday as earlier. Special thanks to Honorable Dr. Gupta ma'am, Director and Senior Consultant, Reproductive Medicine for Ferticity, Fertility Clinic, Delhi. We look forward to hearing you today as you share vast knowledge with all of us, ma'am. We welcome the respected chairpersons, Dr. Anita Kant, Chairman and Head of Obs and Gynae, AIMS, Faridabad, Dr. Vikranti More, Director More Maternity Home, Nashik, Dr. Professor Yashodhara Pradeep, formerly Professor and Head Obs and Gynae, KGMC, Lucknow. She is currently contesting for the post of Vice President FOGSI, North Zone. In the panel, we have Dr. Meenakshi Dua, Consultant IVF, Cloud9 Hospital, Gurgaon, Dr. Priya Varshne, Fertility Consultant, Cloud9 Hospital, Gurgaon, Dr. Shalu Gupta, Associate Director, Cloud9 Hospital, Gurgaon, and vote of thanks by Dr. Poonam Jain, Consultant Gynecologist, Rewari. Welcome to all attendees present with us today. We hope that you all enjoy the session today. Please note this webinar is brought to you as knowledge sharing initiative by Jacksonpal Medical Services, and this session is streaming on Facebook Live. The recording will remain on Jacksonpal's YouTube channel for reference and knowledge sharing. We request all attendees to please post your queries by text in the Q&A box, which will be answered at the end. Due to the time constraint, please share your questions during the webinar itself as text. I will now request Dr. Seema Mittal ma'am to kindly initiate the session.
As you all know, that we have these sessions on every Friday. This is regarding infertility topics, and 30 to 40% of our infertile patients suffer from ovulation disorders. Even some are amenorrheic or oligomenorrheic, and we have now drugs which can really induce ovulation and they can achieve fertility. There are so many adjuncts also which can be used with these fertility inducing drugs, and we have here today the most wonderful speaker, Dr. Gupta. The topic we have kept as ovulation induction protocols from beginning to, there's a question mark, so there is no end to learning, and as we have our partners like Jacksonpal, we will keep on learning new things, and every Friday we are meeting. And here I welcome Dr. Gupta, Director of Fertility Center. Dr. Vikranti will be shortly introducing her. And we have the most wonderful chairpersons and the panelists for this panel who all will add to our knowledge and share their experiences. So we have Dr. Anita Kant Madam, who is the Chairman and Head Obs Gynae Society, Head Obs Gynae, Asian Hospital, Faridabad. Dr. Vikranti More, Director, More Fertility Center. We have Dr. Yashodhara. We are really happy to have Yashodhara ma'am, and ma'am is the past chairperson FOGSI Family Welfare Committee. She is the retired head of the department Gynae Obs from KGMC Lucknow, and ma'am is now contesting for the elections of North Zone Vice President, and we request everybody to vote and support for ma'am. Welcome ma'am, we are really blessed to have you with us. Then our panelists today all are infertility specialists, and they have keen interest in research and infertility presentations. We have Dr. Meenakshi Dua, Dr. Priya Varshne, and Dr. Shalu Gupta. On behalf of Rewari Obs Gynae Society, we welcome you all, and we request Dr. Ila ma'am to proceed. And before that, I will request Dr. Vikranti to introduce our guest speaker for the evening today. Dr. Vikranti More.
Thanks, Seema, for giving me this opportunity. And thanks to Jackson Pal Company, Pharma Company. Thanks to all the chairperson and all the panelists to be here today. And let's start with the topic for
Ma'am,
the
I need to
ovulation
introduce
induction
you.
from A to Z.
Dr. Gupta, I need to introduce you.
Okay, Vikranti, the lovely face.
Thank you. I thought
Actually, ma'am is not used to present. Dr. Ela is a very humble and soft-spoken person. And look at her CV, you know, it's so simplified. She's been our
Actually,
chapter secretary last year, and she's done so many workshops and so much work she does, but you know, she doesn't like to highlight. So I think that's her humbleness, you know. Okay, over to you.
so good evening, everybody. I'm Vikranti More, and I bring greetings to you from Nashik. I'm very thankful to Dr. Seema for having me here with all of you. Allow me to congratulate the Rewari OBGYN Society for this one of its kind webinar series that you all are holding. It's a lovely initiative, you know, the A to Z Infertility every Friday. It's a pleasure to share the screen with all you stalwarts, and let me mention my co-chairpersons, Dr. Anita, who's going to do the question answer sessions with Dr. Ela after her talk, and Dr. Yashodhara. Everybody knows her so well, even here in the West. And ma'am, all the best to you for the VP FOGSI elections that you're going to contest. Our scholar for the day is Dr. Ela Gupta. Her CV is as short and sweet as her, and even as her short name, you know. Madam is the director and a senior consultant in reproductive medicine at the Ferticity Fertility Clinics, Delhi, and she has done her MS in OBGYN. She has pursued her diploma in the IVF and reproductive medicine from Kiel, Germany, as well her diploma in endoscopy from France. Ma'am, after your talk, we will be taking the question answer sessions. And Madam shall also be she'll also be the expert for the panel, which is going to be following her talk. So, ma'am, over to you, and I'm happy to share the screen with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vikranti, for the kind word. So let me start sharing my slides now. So the topic is ovulation induction, and now we know that the ovulation induction, it all depends upon how well we know the physiology and the hormones, how the hormones play throughout the cycle. Physiology very well, and if we know how the hormones they play throughout the cycle, then it becomes easier for us to have the good stimulation, to have the optimum number of the follicles and the good quality of oocytes and embryo. Now we all know that the cycle has the follicular phase and the luteal phase. We are very well aware of how the follicular phase is controlled, which hormones are responsible, and how the luteal is controlled, and which hormone is responsible for the luteal phase. Now it is not only about the follicular phase and the luteal phase during the cycle, it is about the endometrium also, how well the endometrium coordinates with the growth of the follicle to have the pregnancy outcome. So if we look at each month from the pool of 10 to 12 ventral follicles, why a lady ovulates only one follicle every cycle? So if you look at this chart, there's a group of primordial follicles, and out of these primordial follicles, they form the primary oocytes and the secondary oocytes, and the secondary oocytes, they form the antral follicle. Now below the stage of the antral follicle, we look at the primary oocyte and the secondary oocyte, which is the initial recruitment. This is FSH hormone independent. Now when the follicle we see at the second or third day of the cycle of 2 to 5 millimeter in size, so at this stage the follicles, they become FSH dependent, and every individual has its own FSH threshold. So the follicle which meets the FSH threshold, only that follicle grows to the stage of maturity and becomes dominant, and ultimately it ovulates. So this cycle is usually of the follicular phase is of 14 days till the day of ovulation, and after that is the luteal phase. Now if we know very well that even if the cycles are irregular, the luteal phase is always fixed, and that luteal phase should be of 14 days. The follicular phase may vary in cycle, but the luteal phase is always of the 14 days. So even if the patient has the normal regular cycles of 28 days, it doesn't mean that she is ovulating on 14th day and the next 14 days we are getting as the luteal phase. By and large, they have the regular 14 days of the luteal phase, but it is always important to document even the normal 28 days cycle by ultrasound exactly when she is ovulating and what is a luteal length. So the primordial follicle is the pre-enteral stage, which is FSH independent. Then there are the cohort of the enteral follicles, which becomes FSH dependent. And out of these, only one follicle, it reaches to the dominant stage, which produces the estrogen. And because of this increased estrogen at the stage of dominance, it reduces an FSH, sends the negative feedback, and this results in the atresia of the lesser developed or the smaller follicles. So the ovarian steroidogenesis is a result of combined LH and FSH stimulation of the two cell types, that is the theca and the granulosa, which is influenced by autocrine and the paracrine factors. So we all know there's a two-cell, two gonadotropin therapy, that is the granulosa cells and the theca cells, which are controlled by the FSH and the LH hormones both. So the FSH threshold and the recruitment window. Now, what is this FSH threshold and what is the recruitment window? So the recruitment window, it starts from the enteral follicle stage, because it is at the enteral follicle stage which are more of FSH dependent. So the Brown postulated that in gonadotropin therapy, the ovary has a threshold requirement for FSH below which the follicular development does not occur. So that's why the dose of the gonadotropin for each individual, it varies. We cannot have a set protocol for all and every patient. FSH threshold is not fixed for any given follicle. The follicles exhibit different degrees of FSH sensitivity on the time of recruitment. So highest need for FSH is on the early enteral stage and it declines in the late enteral stage. So follicle with the highest sensitivity will benefit most from the increasing FSH level and will subsequently gain the dominance. So then is another hormone, LH. Now, how important is the LH? Whether LH has any role in during the follicular phase or it is important only for the luteal phase. So whenever we are giving the gonadotropins for the stimulation, it's not only the FSH which is important, the HMG or the LH hormone is important, also important for the optimum follicular growth. So what should be the LH level? Now, LH level should be more than 1.2 for the optimum level. It should be the optimum level for the optimum follicular development, and it should be above the threshold but below the ceiling. So LH threshold is more than 1.2 and the LH ceiling is less than 5. So what is LH ceiling? If the level goes beyond 5, then it causes follicular atresia. The oocyte development may be compromised. Suppression of granulosa cells proliferation will be there, or there may be premature luteinization of the pre-ovulatory follicle. So the LH has to be in between 1.2 and 5, because if it is less than 1.2, then it may impair the follicular growth, it may impair the oocyte maturation, and there may be inadequate androgen and the estrogen synthesis. So the recruitment of the follicle may not be good. So this is the importance of the LH hormone in the follicular genesis phase. So there is both the LH therapeutic window and the LH ceiling level. So it should be in between the therapeutic and the ceiling value. So the role of LH, it promotes a dose-associated increase in the secretion of estradiol and androstenedione by the FSH-induced follicles. So as we have seen, the enteral follicle stage is dependent on the FSH. So that when the FSH induces the follicle to grow, the LH, and it results in secretion of the estradiol and androstenedione, then comes the role of the LH. It enhances the ovarian sensitivity to FSH hormone, which is observed in the number of the patients. Increases the successful luteinization of the follicle on exposure to SCG. So there's an onset of LH surge when the follicle size reaches 17 millimeter, the peak estradiol level. Then this onset of the LH surge reduces the FSH hormone and it results in atresia of the waning follicles. LH also results in first meiotic division and the ovulation and the luteinization of the granulosa, resulting in the secretion of progesterone hormone. And we know that how important the progesterone hormone is in the luteal phase and the early pregnancy, if the pregnancy happens to maintain the pregnancy to grow. So for the ovarian stimulation, to obtain the mature and the good quality oocytes, we should have a good ovarian stimulation to have the good quality embryos. And it is not only the good quality embryos, we should have the adequate endocrine milieu. The hormone levels should also be normal. They should not be the supraphysiological value, because we all know that how does it impact on the endometrium. So it is not only the follicular development, we have to be careful about the hormones, how they are growing during the follicular phase, and how they are going to impact on the endometrium for the later two embryos to be transferred, or when the pregnancy has to happen. So if you look at this terminology, the ovulation, we always say ovulation induction. So basically there are three terms: ovulation induction, ovulation augmentation, and superovulation. So ovulation induction is usually for those patients which are not ovulating at all. So this is seen in two categories: WHO group 1, which is the hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, where they do not form the follicle on their own, and the anovulatory women, WHO group 2, which is seen in severely PCO patients, where mostly the cycles are anovulatory. So there we are inducing the ovulation in an ovulatory cycle. So that is ovulation induction. Now ovulation augmentation is usually in the normo-ovulatory women. There they are ovulating, but still they are not getting pregnant. So they are given the stimulating drugs to increase the chances of pregnancy, and there to have more than one follicle so that it increases the chances. Superovulation is usually seen in IVF cycles, where the aim is to develop the multiple follicles. So this is the classification which is given by WHO in 1976 based on the ovulatory dysfunction. The group 1 is hypothalamo-pituitary failure, where there's amenorrhea with no estrogen, decreased or normal FSH, and they can be normal prolactin levels, which causes the hypothalamic-pituitary failure. Second group is hypothalamic-pituitary dysfunction. There's not the complete failure, but the dysfunction is there. Means disturbance including the amenorrhea, the estrogen may be normal, normal FSH and prolactin levels, and the increased LH and androgenization, that is hyperandrogenic state. Then is the hypergonadotropic amenorrhea, which is ovarian failure. We know there's increased FSH and LH and DOE2 levels, where there's a failed end organ response. So these are the three categories defined by WHO. Now, who can benefit from the ovulation induction? We have just seen now. So the patients who have the anovulatory cycles, in cases where there's an infrequent ovulation, sometimes the patient is ovulating very early, sometimes the patient is ovulating very late, or when the follicle is not reaching to the stage of maturity or nothing is getting dominant, they're getting arrested at a very early stage. Then is the hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. In normo-ovulatory women, to increase the chances of pregnancy, the aim is to form more than one follicle, that is ovulation augmentation. And in cases of IVF, that is a superovulation, or to develop the multiple follicles. So when we decide for the ovulation induction, there are so many factors on which our criteria depends upon. So age, we all know it's a very important criteria when we decide for the ovulation induction. BMI, again, is an important factor. Then is the AFC, that is the antral follicle count, which we assess on day 2 or day 3 of the cycle, which gives us the idea like which drugs we should use for the ovulation induction and what the response is going to be, especially in cases of gonadotropin when we are using for ovulation induction. AMH, if the AMH is above 3, we expect the good response. AMH is in between 1 and 2, the fair response. If the AMH is below 1, then we know that the response may not be that very great. The number of years of infertility, again, is very important. The more the number of years of infertility, the more chances of having the difficult folliculogenesis. Then infertility factor, if it's a male infertility or PCO patient or poor responder or normo-ovulatory patient, hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. So the infertility is again the factor which decide our stimulation protocol. Then is the previous response to ovulation induction. Suppose she has already taken clomiphene citrate for many years or many cycles, then we are not going to give a clomiphene citrate again. We'll switch on to the next drug. If she has already taken to the clomiphene citrate or letrozole, then the next line of action would be to move on to gonadotropins. If she has taken gonadotropins earlier, then how much dose she has responded to and what was the response to those gonadotropins, again will decide our dose of gonadotropins and the protocol by which we are going to stimulate the patient. So the importance when we decide for the regime, it should be appropriate in terms of age and duration of infertility, the cause of infertility, the pregnancy outcome is again important, whatever we are choosing for our ovulation induction. The main thing which we have to look upon is the pregnancy, then value for money. It should not be very costly, patient affordability should be there, and create the minimum emotional stress on the patient. So the drugs which are used in ART, they are the anti-estrogens. We are very well aware of these drugs, clomiphene citrate and tamoxifen. Aromatase inhibitor, the letrozole, gonadotropins, HMG and FSH. And the drugs which are used to prevent the LH surge are the analogs like agonist and antagonist. So one by one, we will come on to these drugs. Then there are certain adjuvants which are also given depending upon the patient AFC and the AMH or other criteria to improve the chances of our ovulation induction. So metformin and inositol, these are the insulin sensitizing agent. Then is the bromocriptine in cases of hyperprolactinemic patient, dexamethasone in hyperandrogenic states, the growth hormone and the DHEA in poor responders. The surgical is the ovarian drilling. So before starting the stimulation of the patient, the few investigations are very important. Day 2, day 3, FSH, LH and A2 possible. The AMH, nowadays we mostly rely on the AMH and the AFC. The thyroid profile and prolactin, semen analysis and morphology. So one semen count is very important before starting the patient on ovulation induction drugs. Because I've seen so many cases coming from outside where the induction has been done so many cycles and there was no semen analysis report. And when you take such patients for ovulation induction further and get the semen analysis, invariably their count and motility is compromised. So before, even if we are giving them the oral drugs, one basic semen parameter is very important. Then the tubal patency, either by SSG, HSG, we can choose these basic investigations first. But if we feel there is endometriosis or any other pelvic pathology, then we can take the patient directly for laparoscopy also. The rubella status and the hemoglobin electrophoresis, now these days these are mandatory to do for these infertile patients, because if the female partner has thrombophilia profile, thalassemia is there, then at least we can investigate the partner also to see whether the partner is normal or not, and accordingly the counseling for both the partners is important to prevent to have the thalassemia major baby. Then day 2, day 3 transvaginal scan to check for the ovarian cyst before starting stimulation. Now ovarian cyst to rule out is very important, because invariably the patient, if she has not ovulated in the earlier cycle and if you give the stimulation drugs without getting the day 2, day 3 scan on to rule out the cyst, and if she has already the pre-existing cyst, then with the stimulation drugs, the cyst size will keep on increasing and you may not have the normal folliculogenesis. So before starting the stimulation, the transvaginal scan to rule out the cyst is important. It is not only for the follicular cyst or any functional cyst, but to check for the endometriosis or any other kind of the pathology also. Then the number of the antral follicles and the endometrial thickness, implying there is not a complete shedding of the endometrium. And if there is not a complete shedding of the endometrium, maybe the estrogen level is high inside the body. So if the endometrium is thick, wait for 1 or 2 days more to start the stimulation and the endometrium thickness to come down to normal. So this is the day 2 scan where we see the number of the antral follicles in each ovary. So this will help us to decide the dose of the drug, especially in cases of gonadotropin therapy. Now the clomiphene citrate, we all know it's a competitive inhibitor of the estrogen, and we can give this drug in every kind of the patient except the hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. The dose should be started from 50 milligram from day 2 of the cycle for 5 days. And if the patient is not responding to 50 milligram, she's not ovulating to 50 milligram, gradually in the next cycle, you can increase the dose to 100 and 150. So maximum, I would like to go to 150. The patient is not stimulating. In my practice, I have very rarely used 150 dose of the drug. I increase it up to 100 milligram. If she doesn't respond to 100 milligram, then switch over to other mode of ovulation induction. Ovulation rate has been reported to 70%, the pregnancy rate to 40%. So what is the drawback with the clomiphene citrate? An obese patient may require the higher dose of clomiphene citrate. So if the BMI of the patient is high, then you can start with 100 milligram of the clomiphene citrate dose. It has anti-estrogenic effect, and the half-life of this drug is 30 to 60 days. Follicular monitoring is mandatory whenever we are giving the drugs of stimulation to the patient. Start the monitoring from day 9 or day 10 of the cycle. When you see the dominant follicle size reaching 18 to 20 millimeter, get the estradiol level done once to see what is the estradiol level. And when the estradiol level is 150 to 200 picogram per ml per follicle, then decide for the SCG trigger. And it can be induced either by 5,000 or 10,000 unit of SCG. And based on what you have planned for that particular patient, you can ask the patient to try either naturally or plan an IUI cycle. So this is the ultrasound picture where you see the dominant follicle. It's good in size, 18 millimeter, and the nice trilaminar endometrium with a good peri-endometrial and the peri-follicular flow. Now, sometimes when we induce the patient with clomiphene citrate, this is the day 14 picture, where you see the follicle size. This is the dominant follicle, this is lesser than this follicle, but see the endometrium, how thin it is. The endometrium is not corresponding to the size of the follicle. Now, what could be the reason here? So, in my practice, I would always like to do the natural cycle monitoring for each and every patient, whether the patient is for natural cycle trial or for patient IUI cycle or for IVF, because that natural cycle monitoring always gives me so many clues about the follicles, about the ovary, and about the endometrium. Now, when we see this type of the response with the clomiphene citrate, we will not come to know if the natural cycle monitoring has not been done earlier. This is the basic character or nature of the patient endometrium, or is it because of the clomiphene citrate, because it has the anti-estrogenic effect if the patient has already taken clomiphene citrate previously many cycles, or it is because the follicles, maybe the size is okay, but the oocyte developing inside the follicle is not mature enough, so the endometrium is not corresponding with the follicular size. So we have to rule out all these things. So how we can rule out? One is by always the natural cycle monitoring to see whether on that particular day, whether it is the day 13 or the 14, whether it is corresponding to that particular thickness of the endometrium, or to do the E2 levels and see whether the estradiol has reached to that stage to decide for the trigger based on the size of the follicle. Now, in such patients, if we wait for 2 days more or 3 days more, maybe the endometrium may grow up to the expected thickness. So 75% of the conception occurs during the first 3 clomiphene citrate cycles. But if the pregnancy is not achieved within 5 to 6 cycles, alternative therapy should be chosen. Now, this 5 to how many cycles of clomiphene citrate we have to try for a particular patient again will depend upon many factors like the age, BMI, age, AMH, AFC, the previously how many cycles she has taken. So accordingly, take a decision and move to the next protocol. Now, there are 2 terms like the clomiphene citrate and clomiphene failure. So clomiphene citrate is when patient is not responding even when you have step up the dose up to 150 milligram, and she's not ovulating, then move on to the other drug, maybe the aromatase inhibitor, tamoxifen or gonadotropin. The clomiphene citrate failure is when patient is responding to clomiphene citrate, but she is not conceiving with the clomiphene citrate even after 4 to 5 cycles. Then again, either you combine with the gonadotropin to improve the hormonal milieu inside, or switch on to aromatase inhibitor or to gonadotropins. Now, another anti-estrogenic drug is the tamoxifen. We all know the anti-estrogenic effect of tamoxifen is less as compared to clomiphene citrate. But I think many people, not many people, are using tamoxifen as ovulation induction drug. So the dose is 20 to 40 milligram per day from day 2 for 5 days of the cycle. And the ovulation rate reported is 56%. It is less often used than clomiphene, as the abortion rate as reported is higher as compared to clomiphene citrate. So the next important drug is the aromatase inhibitor, and many of us are using this drug, and I think in many clinics this has replaced the clomiphene citrate as the first choice of drug. So aromatase inhibitor is 2.5 to 5 milligram dose, which is used per day from day 2 for 5 days of the cycle. And there are many regimes which have come up, the extended days of drug like 7 days or 10 days or alternate days, or the single dose of 20 milligram on day 3. But I have not personally not tried this dose, this protocol of 20 milligram on day 3. I am still using either 2.5 or 5 milligram only for 5 days. Now, half-life of this drug is short. It is only 45 hours. And the benefit is, or the advantage over the clomiphene citrate and the drug is, it has no anti-estrogenic effect. And it improves the treatment outcome by reducing the supraphysiological estrogen levels when the multiple follicles are formed. So now if we see the Litrose cycle, now this is the follicle on day 9. Now sometimes with the Litrose cycle, you see suddenly a very big follicle comes up on day 9 or day 10 of the cycle. But again, the endometrium may not be corresponding, or it may be very low in thickness. So again, as we know that letrozole or the aromatase inhibitor, it has it keeps the E2 levels low. So if we check the E2 level at that particular moment of time, the E2 may be less than 100. So better is to wait for 3-4 days so that the endometrium also catches up and then give the trigger. Sometimes you see the endometrium well in advance than the follicular size. So if you see the endometrium 9-10 millimeter and the follicle is still small, again, because both of them are not matching together, then do the E2 levels, and if the E2 level is low, don't give the trigger at that point of time. Wait for another 2-3 days till the follicle size reaches to maximum and then give the trigger. Now this is the Litrose cycle. Now you see when the follicle has attained, after waiting for 3-4 days, the follicle attains its maturity, and you see the nice cervical mucus in the canal. So this is again a very important parameter to assess whether the E2 level will be okay or it will be less than the normal. So, and this is a very important head to always, when you're doing the monitoring yourself, with the thickness, always check for the cervical mucus. So the application of letrozole, I think this aromatase inhibitor can be given to any patient. Nowadays, it can be given to an unexplained infertility patient, male infertility patient, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian diseases, and in conjunction with gonadotropins, even in poor responders. So it is a drug which has now, at the current time, it has replaced the clomiphene citrate cycle. In polycystic ovaries patient, it has the benefit because it forms the single follicle, monofollicular development. So because of this monofollicular development, it is a preferred drug over the clomiphene citrate drug. Then in endometriosis, because we all know that endometriosis, already the estradiol levels are high. So to keep the estradiol level low, the clomiphene, this aromatase inhibitor is the drug of choice. In poor responders, because it is an aromatase inhibitor, the androgens increases, it increases the level of androgen inside the body, and these androgens helps in more follicular recruitment. So again, it has a beneficial role in the poor responders. Advantage of this drug, it has no anti-estrogen effect, monofollicular development, rapid clearance, no accumulation of the metabolites, and the reduced rate of multiple pregnancy and the hyperstimulation syndrome. So these are the current guidelines. We can use them, aromatase inhibitor in polycystic ovarian patients. or in patients with the clomiphene citrate resistance is there. And in cancer patients, it has a very important role when we plan for the ovulation induction for oocyte cryopreservation. This is another protocol which is commonly used, clomiphene citrate or the aromatase inhibitor. Both can be combined with the gonadotropins when you don't want to give them to gonadotropins alone. So the advantage of combining the gonadotropins with the clomiphene citrate or aromatase inhibitor is the dose of the gonadotropins will be reduced, and the incidence, you can reduce the incidence of hyperstimulation or too many follicular coming up by adding gonadotropin with these two drugs. So there are various type of the protocols when we add gonadotropins to the clomiphene citrate or to the aromatase inhibitor. Now again, the clomiphene citrate or the aromatase inhibitor can be started from day 2 or day 3 of the cycle for 5 days and add the HMG or FSH. Now based again on the previous response of the drug or other factors, whether you want to start with 75 units or 150 units from day 5, day 6 or day 7. The another protocol is you can give from day 2 along with the clomiphene citrate alternate days for first 3 to 4 days. Call the patient for follicular monitoring on 8th or 9th day, and depending upon the response and how big the follicle is in size, you can decide for the further dose of the gonadotropin whether the patient requires it or not. Now, whether we are combining gonadotropins with clomiphene citrate or aromatase inhibitor, or when we are giving the gonadotropins alone, I'll come to the gonadotropins in coming few cycles. But for how long we can wait in a particular cycle to cancel the cycle? This is very important, and I'll come to this slide later after discussing the gonadotropins. When to give the gonadotropins? In clomiphene resistant cases, non-responders or the failures, hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, or in IVF ICSI cycles or aromatase inhibitor failures. We all know the types of gonadotropins which are available: urinary gonadotropins, highly purified gonadotropins, and the recombinant gonadotropins. So if we look at the recombinant versus the urinary gonadotropins, the recombinant has few advantages over the urinary, that is batch to batch consistency, no impurities. They can be given subcutaneously, better oocyte quality. The estradiol levels are low, better quality embryos, but if you look at the pregnancy rate, it's almost the same as compared to the urinary. But definitely they are more costlier as urinaries. So it's not that if we are using the urinary gonadotropin, the pregnancy rate will not be better, or we are supposed to use only the recombinant for our IUI cycles or IVF cycles. The advantage over urinary, which I see as the recombinant preparation, is the dose of the drug. Like the urinary gonadotropins, they are available in 75 units. So there we cannot divide the dose. Here in recombinant preparation, if you want to use the 35 units or 50 units of the drug, at least you can use that 35 units or 50 units to start with. So that is the advantage of having the recombinant over the urinary. How much dose to be given? Again, the factors are the age, BMI, AMH, ovarian volume, and ventral follicle, and the previous cycle response. So when we are using the gonadotropins alone for ovulation induction, we have to be very, very careful. And in patients, especially in PCO patients, the counseling is very important before starting the gonadotropins. If we are starting with the low dose protocol and it is for the natural conception or the IUI cycle, then to counsel the patient about then how many number of days it is going to take to develop the follicle, whether the follicle development will be there or not, whether she is going to ovulate with so much of injections and so many number of days of the stimulation, what will be the cost involved. So all these details has to be explained to the patients, and regarding the intent giving the gonadotropins. So the protocol which is favored on for the PCOS patients, especially in cases of IUI cycles or naturally trying cycles in an ovulatory PCOS, is the chronic low dose protocol. Now in this chronic low dose protocol, the dose which we start is with 37.5 units per day. and increase the dose by half an ampule per week. So that means 50 units per week. You can increase the dose or 75 units and increase the dose by half an ampule per week till the follicle size reaches 14 millimeter. Once the follicle size reaches 14 millimeter, then continue with the same dose till the follicle grows up to 17-18 millimeters in size. But now the disadvantage of this protocol is it takes very long time. So the patient sometimes they lose their patient and it's a prolonged treatment. But the advantage is sometimes it may lead to the monofollicular development. The step-up protocol, here you are starting with 75 units per day from day 2, day 3 and increased by half ampule every 3 to 5 days depending on the follicular growth. And the dose is maintained again depending upon the size of the follicle. And if the follicle size is more than 14 millimeter, you can step down the dose, you can reduce the dose. If the follicle size is 13-14 millimeter, you can continue with the same dose up to the follicle size reaches to the 17-18 millimeter. Now the advantage of this protocol is appropriate for the PCOS patient, monofollicular development, and it avoids high levels of E2, reduces the risk of multiple pregnancy and ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Again, the disadvantage is again the longer stimulation time. Then comes the step down protocol. Now the step down protocol where we start with the higher doses of protocol and then step down the dose once the follicle size reaches 12-13 millimeter. And this protocol is usually followed in the IVF cycles. So the advantage of this protocol is it is more physiological. If we see the physiology where we need the FSH threshold to recruit the follicle and to start with the follicular growth, the same we are doing here in the step down protocol. We are starting with a little higher dose of FSH so that we get good many follicles recruited. And once the follicle size reaches 12-13 millimeter, then you step down the protocol, the dose of the gonadotropin. And usually when we follow this protocol, the patient takes 9 to 10 days for the follicle size to reach 17-18 millimeter. But the disadvantage is very intense monitoring is required and the increased chances of having multiple pregnancy, multiple follicular growth and high E2 levels with high risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So if we are using this protocol, we have to be very, very careful. So now when we are using the gonadotropins, suppose if the patient develops more than 4 follicles of 16 millimeter in size and there are other follicles of 10 to 12 millimeter in size, E2 level is very high or it has gone beyond 1500 picogram, what are you going to do? Are you going to still continue with the same cycle? How your counseling to the patient is going to differ? What are you going to counsel to such patient? Are we going to cancel the cycle? Or what kind of trigger are we going to give to this patient? And are we going to take the chance of multiple pregnancy and hyperstimulation? So there we have to discuss this situation with the patient in detail and explain all the possibilities which are available in your center. The best is if you have the IVF setup, then to convert without wasting the cycle because you spend so much on the injection, the cost is involved. So to convert, if possible, to convert this cycle into the IVF cycle, and if the patient is not willing, then to cancel the cycle. So either to withhold the SCG and wait for the spontaneous rupture, use the gonadotropin releasing hormone analog as a trigger. And if you're using the analog as a trigger, then you have to have the good luteal phase support and no SCG to be given, or to convert the cycle to an IVF cycle if you have the facility, giving them with the, treating them with antagonist also in the same setting. So we come to agonists now. Gonadotropin releasing hormone agonists, they are used usually in the IVF cycles. And in the IUI cycles, only when you're not using SCG as a trigger, then you can use the agonist as a trigger also for the LS surge, endogenous LS surge. So when we're using the agonist as a LH surge trigger, then the chances of going into one is the hyperstimulation is not there, because SCG has a very important role in resulting into the hyperstimulation. So it can be used to suppress the excessive LH during the follicular phase and suppression of the premature LS surge. Now, sometimes when we stimulate a patient for the IUI cycle also, sometimes you see the progesterone goes very high or the endometrium goes in advance, 3-4 days in advance. That is, it loses its character, it changes it to hyperestrogenic state, or it becomes hyperechoic, or sometimes the follicle ruptures too prematurely. So in such cases, if we combine the cycle with the agonist, then we can prevent all this. But then when you're combining the agonist in IUI cycles, then again, there are some disadvantages also. So the protocols which are used for the agonist is the ultra short protocol, where they're given only from day 1 to day 3. The short protocol, where they're given from day 1 to the day of SCG. The long protocol, it starts from the mid-luteal phase of the preceding cycle and continued till the day of SCG. So roughly, it's take 3 weeks. Ultra long protocol is when we are suppressing the patient for 2 cycles or 3 cycles, where we are giving the depot preparation. And usually this ultra long protocol is followed in the endometriosis patient, or in cases of adenomyosis, where we are preparing the patient for embryo transfer cycles. Then are the antagonist. Antagonist, it blocks the gonadotropin releasing hormone receptors without activating the receptors. So this is the advantage over the gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist. Now agonist, they will stimulate. So initially for first 2 weeks, it has the flare effect. It will increase the FSH and the LH. So when we are using the agonist, there's a tendency to form the cyst also because of this flare effect, which is not there when we are using the antagonist. So patient is suppressed in agonist cycles only after 3 weeks, because first 2 weeks is the flare effect, and when we are using the agonist for continuation in 3 weeks, then the complete suppression takes place. Now antagonist, the dose, it can be the single dose protocol, which is also known as the French protocol. Here the 3 milligram is given on day 8 or day 9 of stimulation. Or the multiple dose protocol, UPEC protocol, where you're starting the daily dose of 0.25 milligram from day 6 of stimulation till the day of SCG. So usually this protocol, the multiple dose protocol, is followed in the IVF centers. Now this protocol of multiple dose again can be a fixed protocol, or it can be a variable protocol. Now fixed protocol means irrespective of the size of the follicle, whether it is 9 millimeter, 10 millimeter, 11 millimeter or 12 millimeter, you're starting your antagonist from day 6 of the cycle, from the day 6 of stimulation. So this is the fixed protocol. The variable protocol is when you see your follicle has reached 12 to 13 millimeter in size, then you start your antagonist. So that is a variable protocol. Because sometimes in polycystic ovaries patient, when you stimulate a patient, you see when you call the patient on day 5 or day 6, the follicle sizes, they are only 9 to 10 millimeters. So there you can wait for 1 or 2 days more to start your antagonist. So that is the added advantage of the variable protocol over the fixed protocol. So these antagonist protocols, they are usually followed in PCOS patient to avoid the hyperstimulation cycles. And the added advantage when we do the antagonist protocol in PCOS patient is to give them the agonist trigger. So when we are giving them the agonist trigger, we are reducing the chances of hyperstimulation to very, very low. In poor responders, the antagonist cycle is preferred because here you're not suppressing the cycle. So the number of follicles recruited will be much better and be more as compared to the agonist. and the dosage of the gonadotropins used will be also much less as compared to the agonist cycle. IUI cycle only in those cases where you feel the patient has a tendency of premature LS surge or premature rupture of the follicles. So if we compare the agonist and the antagonist protocol, the agonist, as I told you initially, it has the flare-up effect. It increases the FSH and LH, while the antagonist, it immediately suppresses the LH because it is acting on the receptor. Now agonist, because it has a flare-up effect and it is increasing the FSH, so it has a tendency to form the cyst. The slow recovery of the pituitary function because of the suppression of the hormones, while in antagonist cycle there will be quick recovery. Upon your program, your schedule, you can continue the dose of agonist, and then based on your program, you can start the stimulation. While in antagonist cycle, you have to be starting the stimulation from day 2 or day 3 of the cycle. You cannot delay the stimulation. So antagonist cycle is more patient convenience. In agonist cycle, there is more oocyte recovery as compared to antagonist cycle. The agonists take long duration as compared to antagonist, where the antagonist is only short duration. The cycle is over in 10 to 11 days. Increased risk of agonist protocol, because here you cannot give the agonist as a trigger. Here you have to give the SCG only as a trigger. While in antagonist cycle, even if the E2 levels are high, patients have multiple follicles, you can at least give the agonist trigger and to reduce the chances of hyperstimulation. In agonist cycle, because it has a suppression effect, it suppresses the hormone, the pituitary. So there you need the good luteal support if you're transferring the embryos in the same cycle. In antagonist protocol, because we have not suppressed, it is only the receptors which are suppressed. So the luteal phase is not that intense. This is a study which shows that there is no advantage in routinely using the gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs in conjunction with gonadotropins for ovulation induction in women with clomiphene resistant PCOS or in IUI cycle especially. So what are the disadvantages of analogs in IUI cycles? One is the increased duration of therapy. The cycle becomes costly, higher chances of hyperstimulation syndrome and multiple pregnancy risk. And if we look at the statistics, then not much the significant increase in the pregnancy rate if we are using analogs in the IUI cycles. We come on to the adjuvants now. So adjuvants, when used along with the ovulation induction agent, improves ovulation rate and the fertility outcome. And these adjuvants, the most common adjuvants I have taken here. So one is the insulin sensitizing agent. It can be metformin or dinostor. And bromocriptine is given only when patient has hyperprolactinemia. Dexamethasone in cases of hyperandrogenic situations. When we come on to metformin, which is the most commonly used insulin sensitizer, it reduces the insulin resistance in PCOS patient by 65 to 80%. And because it reduces the insulin resistance, so it helps in restoring the ovulation, especially in ovulatory cycles. It also reduces the total and free androgen levels. So the dose which is metformin, which is usually given, is 1500 to 15 per day. Now, when we are putting the patient on metformin, we start with 500 milligram dose with the meal, initially for 3 to 5 days, and when the patient gets used to of such dose, then you increase it to 1000 milligram, then to 1500 milligram. So usually it is up to 1500 milligram. If the BMI is high or patient is obese, BMI is very high, then you can switch on up to the 2000 milligram dose also per day. It's seen that restores the regular cycles and ovulation in 25 to 95% of the cases. Now, as it does not increase the basal or the meal-induced insulin, so it does not cause hypoglycemia. So this is important. Sometimes the patients, they become very anxious when you give them the metformin. Okay, my mother-in-law or my so-and-so is also taking metformin. So this is a drug which is given to a diabetic patient. So there you have to counsel them. Okay, what is the role of metformin in your case? Why we are giving metformin to you? It's not going to affect your sugar because your sugars are normal. So you will not have hypoglycemia. But when the patient is diabetic, there the metformin dose should be adjusted by the diabetologist or by the endocrinologist. The another question is whether it is safe in pregnancy. It is very safe in pregnancy, and moreover, it reduces the pregnancy and the PCOS-induced complications like the early pregnancy loss, miscarriages, gestational diabetes, PIH, insulin, and the intrauterine growth retardation. So these incidences are very, very less when you use the metformin throughout the pregnancy in such cases. Now, there are studies which have seen if ovulation and the pregnancy rates with metformin in PCOS patients. So when the clomiphene citrate is combined with metformin and when it is given alone, it has shown that the ovulation and pregnancy rate are much better when the metformin is combined with the clomiphene citrate cycles. So these are the existing recommendations to use in the PCOS patient in anovulatory cycles or where the BMI is more than 30 kg per meter square. So the guidelines which were made by the IFNs in the polycystic ovary syndrome patients with impaired glucose tolerance. In obese polycystic ovaries patient can be administered with clomiphene citrate, or in clomiphene citrate resistant cases can also be given. The patients who are at high risk of hyperstimulation, there also the metformin plays a very important role in reducing the risk of hyperstimulation. So doses I've already discussed with you. Don't start with a higher dose at one go. Start with 500 milligram daily, and when the patient gets used to it, then increase the dose of the metformin. Then is a growth hormone, which is also used in cases of poor responders. So how the growth hormone helps in recruiting the follicles or in improving the ovarian response. It increases the circulating insulin growth factor 1, promotes the growth and function of granulosa and theca cells, augment the basal and gonadotropin stimulated steroidogenesis and mitosis. The risk is reported risk of glucose intolerance, so contraindicated in cases of diabetes. The protocol, dosage, starting time, duration of use still has not been standardized, but if you go through the literature, in most of the centers, they are using growth hormone as 4 units per day from the day of stimulation till the follicle size reaches 13-14 millimeters in size. Then is DHEA is another important adjuvant which is given in poor responders very commonly, and it acts as a pro-hormone facilitating the follicular growth and the function, increases the pool of follicles up to pre-enteral stage and increases the production of IGF-1. So the dose is 25 milligram either TDS, or nowadays the drugs are available of 75 milligram also, which is once a day for 3 months. Then is the laparoscopic ovarian drilling. Now, how it helps as an adjuvant or in the medical therapy or helps the patient to ovulate. It reduces the androgenic fluid LH secretion. Reduction in inhibin increases FSH. Release of growth factors in response to injury augments the effect of FSH on folliculogenesis. So the advantage of ovarian drilling is does not require intense monitorings reduces incidence of hyperstimulation syndrome. It reduces the dose of gonadotropin required, and patient starts ovulating within 6 to 12 weeks. But the complications are pelvic adhesions and premature ovarian failure. Now, it's not that key for every PCO patient we are going for ovarian drilling. We have to judiciously select the patients, which patients we take for ovarian drilling, how much drilling has to be done, and whether particular patient requires a drilling also or not. So if we look at the guidelines, the guideline says that the ovarian drilling should be done in anovulatory polycystic ovarian syndrome women who are clomiphene resistant or who are not responding to the aromatase inhibitors also, and have hypersecretion of luteinizing hormone levels with no other subfertility factor. So there, the laparoscopic ovarian surgery is recommended, but this is a second line treatment. It's only recommended when the patient is not responding to the oral stimulating drugs, and the patient cannot come for the regular follow-up or the regular follicular monitoring. So there, laparoscopic ovarian drilling. The number of punctures should depend on the size of the ovary, and it should be limited to maximum 4 to 6. In no other, laparoscopic ovarian drilling should not be offered for non-fertility indications or for severe male factors of women with obstructive tubal disease. So this is a contraindication for laparoscopic ovarian drilling. Now, if we look at the hyperstimulation in the difficult cases, the difficult cases means if picogram per ml, many follicles, the poor responders where E2 level is only less than 500 picogram and less than 3 follicles.
Dr. Ela, you're not audible to us.
Dr. Ela? Dr. Ela, you can put your video off, so then maybe your internet will be better. We can't hear you.
With such patients, exercise, weight loss, and lifestyle modification is very important. Insulin sensitizers has a very important role. Citrate,
So actually her internet connection was very weak, and I think she's just, yeah, she'll be joining again. She'll be joining, yeah.
Can we invite Dr. Anita ma'am till then, until she joins?
Right.
Anita Kant ma'am?
Gupta ma'am, you need to unmute.
Anita ma'am?
Yes, yes, I've done that.
Ma'am, also. Hello ma'am. Yes.
Hello.
Okay, ma'am.
Ma'am has come back. Let her.
Right. Welcome, Dr. Ela. Yes.
No, we can have the questions.
Okay, right.
Any doubt till I come?
Okay.
So,
Ma'am, many people have congratulated. About 500 people have joined. There are greetings from Nepal also. And well, should I start with the questions? Who will be answering?
just a moment. I think Dr. Ela has really justified the topic
yes.
very well.
Yeah, very well. Yes.
It was brilliant and the most relevant talk. And I'm really happy that you were the best chosen scholar for today's evening. So we have made the questions also. So I think most of the questions that the audience or the participants will be asking is answered. So very happy, ma'am. And over to you now, Anita, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Sachin Shah has asked, can we use both clomiphene citrate and letrozole together for ovulation induction?
Dr. Ela, ma'am, please answer.
Very small questions are there. I mean, small answers, I believe. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yeah. Sorry.
Hello. Ma'am, Dr. Sachin Shah has asked, can we use both clomiphene and letrozole together for ovulation induction? Hello?
Dr. Ela, you put your video off.
No, we cannot. We should not use both. We should not use.
Yes.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
ma'am, you are. Yes, you are, ma'am.
Yeah, we should not use both the clomiphene and aromatase together, because if you see the mechanism of action, both are different in their mechanism of action. Okay. We should not use, we can combine clomiphene or aromatase. We should not combine clomiphene citrate with aromatase inhibitor, because both their mechanism, both the mechanism of action of these drugs.
Ma'am, what is the maximum dose of letrozole that can be given for ovulation induction?
I have used in my practice.
Okay. Can a para-ovarian cyst persistent for more than 6 months affect ovulation induction?
Para-ovarian cyst. See, para-ovarian cyst will not affect the ovulation induction. It is only the ovarian cyst which will affect ovulation induction.
Dr. Uma Devi has asked how to decide FSH or HMG for day 5, 6, 7. You have beautifully answered that. In case of delayed response of about 3 to 4 days of ovulation, it is corresponding to follicular size. Can we wait for 2 or 3 normal cycles before going for ovulation induction again? Dr. Veena wants to know.
The question is not clear to me. Patient is taking ovulation induction drug.
And there's delayed response for about 3 to 4 days. Response is delayed, ovum formation.
No, delayed response.
Follicle.
Or she has ovulated
No,
late.
follicle is not growing good enough. It is delayed growth of follicle.
So delayed growth of follicle means whether it reaches to the stage of maturity also.
Yes,
or
it does.
See,
she says it goes till ovulation.
Pardon?
She says it ovulates, but ovulates late.
Late.
Yes, 3 to 4 days late. Yes.
If she is ovulating late, 3 to 4 days.
So how to approach should? Yes. So should you wait for some normal cycles?
See, it's not the cycle, not irregular. Okay, such patients, they are going to ovulate late also. But then you have to manage the luteal phase very well. It's not that if the patient is ovulating or if there is a delayed ovulation by 3-4 days, the follicle is not good or the egg developing inside the follicle is not good enough to have the pregnancy. Sometimes those very patients, they come with a spontaneous pregnancy also if you leave those patients as such.
And
in such if the patient is ovulating late, then such patients may have the short luteal phase. Such patients may have the impaired luteal phase. So there we have to check for the progesterone and give them the luteal phase support.
I hope the answer is clear, ma'am. Then Dr. Uma Devi wants to know when to check ET. Endometrial thickness. Endometrial thickness.
Whenever you are doing the follicular monitoring, the endometrial, it is not only the follicular monitoring, it is the endometrium monitoring also. See, you have to give the pregnancy to the patient. So you are not focusing only on the development of the follicle. The development of the follicle should be synchronized with endometrial growth also.
Many people have asked for dose of
Dexamethasone dose.
Dose of
dexamethasone dose and how many days, and in hyperandrogenic state, how much to give?
Fine. Dexamethasone is 5 milligram.
How many days, ma'am?
And up to the trigger.
And she wants to know, in hyperandrogenic state, can it be given?
Yeah, it's given in hyperandrogenic state only.
Okay. Dr. Mitlesh Bansal wants to know, if AMH is low, what drug and dose? I think you covered it very well in your talk. GTT is a must before starting metformin. I don't think so, ma'am. What's your opinion?
See, metformin we are given to the PCO patient. So in any case, the PCO patient, the glucose tolerance test is important. Invariably, they have a family history of diabetes, and before starting metformin, this is the basic test for the PCO patient to be done when we are starting the metformin tablet.
They've asked growth hormone, how it is used. I think you've explained it very well in your talk, ma'am. How to interpret day 2 estradiol levels?
Day 2 estradiol level.
Yes.
Day 2 estradiol level. See, some centers they take 40 milligram as the level cutoff level. Some centers they take 60 milligram as the cutoff level. Now, E2 levels on day 2 of the cycle is not mandatory for each and every patient undergoing ovulation induction. Especially for if the patient is trying for the natural cycle or for IUI cycles. If you're doing the ultrasound, transvaginal scan on day 2 or day 3, if the ovaries are quiet, there is no remnant of the cyst or no functional cyst, endometrium is thin, then in such cases, it's not mandatory to check for the E2 level.
There are certain very small questions on day 2. If there is an ovarian cyst, do we go ahead?
No, with the induction.
If the ovarian cyst, again depends on what kind of the cyst it is.
Okay.
If the patient has endometriotic cyst, definitely you're going to go for the ovulation induction. If it is just a functional cyst, and functional cyst is less than 12-13 millimeter in size, E2 level is less than 40, you can again go for stimulation. But if the cyst size is more than 13-14 millimeter, if the E2 levels are high, then better is not to stimulate that cycle. If she has corpus luteum cyst or the hemorrhagic cyst, how big the cyst is, so it depends upon the type of the cyst and the size of the cyst. The size of the cyst is less than 12-13 millimeter E2 level, then in that case you can get the E2 levels done to see the E2 levels are not high. If the E2 levels are low, then such cases can go for ovulation induction.
Most of the questions are repetitions, ma'am. And I think I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Seema now, because we are running short of time. But beautiful, ma'am. Beautiful presentation and beautiful answers. Thank you so much.
It was really nice to be with Anita, ma'am.
Most slides are left, but I think there's a shortage of time now.
How many slides are left?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So I think everything almost covered by Dr. Ila, but Anita ma'am, it was really nice to see you here. And
thank you
for sparing your valuable time. And over to Yashodhara ma'am. Yashodhara ma'am is such a senior gynecologist, and we are really blessed. Yashodhara ma'am. So ma'am will share or add anything, and we'll thank Dr. Ila for such a marvelous talk. Dr. Yashodhara ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Seema. At the outset, I must say that for giving me the opportunity to congratulate you. That the Rewari, you are the president of this, and your team is so well doing that academic activity every Friday is something which has to be congratulated. and plus giving me the opportunity to chair the session of a very academic and very learned speaker of today, Dr. Ila Gupta, who has really made the task so easy. It's such a complex topic, and you started from the primordial follicle. My question was, and going up to the GnRH agonist and antagonist and metformin, you have not left a single stone unturned about the ovulation protocol, which has to be discussed. My question is only thing that we have now, the research has attained so much about it. This protocol which we are talking about, this CC plus HMG 7, 8, 9 day, we are using 25 years back when it was not anywhere reported in any of the books. But we started this, the clomiphene 150, we had all these theses and all those things in the 25 or 30 years back. So my only point is there anything by which we can alter the primordial follicle or the selection of the primary oocyte or the secondary oocyte? Because everything is being done not 1 month or 2 months ago. It has been done 5-6 months ago. Yeah. So is there anything which we can do in these 5-6 months so we can have the selection of the oocytes are better, so the entry follicles are better, so they are, once they are having the endogenous FSH and LH or exogenous FSH and LH, they are working better? So do you know anything about it? Any research or anything?
At the level of primary oocyte and secondary oocyte, so it's difficult. I don't think so. We have anything now to recruit the follicles at that stage. But the DHEA in poor responders, they also act at the antral stage level. They don't act at pre-antral stage level.
Ma'am, but some have recommended both for male infertility and female that supplement of certain vitamins like vitamin C, zinc, and this is all empirical, not proved, but they say that if it is started beforehand, even vitamin D and calcium, and they can really help somewhere to improve these factors which you have mentioned. But
it is very difficult to say because all this is empirical.
Molecular,
and the patients,
it is a transcription and signaling pathways, and there are certain proteins, that is a FGLA and other proteins which are there. So it is basically when the embryogenesis is occurring at that stage, because the primordial follicles are formed at that stage. So it is being said that maternal nutrition is very good, and the nutrition up to the puberty, because these everything is being there, that inflammation should not occur, cytokines and all these should not be there. So your proteins which are in the body, or I mean special proteins, not the ordinary proteins, it's a special proteins. I was just looking at it, that FGLA is something like that, and transcription and signaling pathways. So probably it is all endogenous factors which we are coming across. They really put you on certain kind of the things. So it is probably that can only improve. So we should not be, this is my idea only, that maybe the stress also plays an important role. Very important role. So instead of women coming immediately just after 6 months or 1 year after marriage, and there's something because in the family somebody has not conceived, so she becomes so terrified, or the in-laws are says you go to the doctor and all those things. So she should be counseling plays a very important role in all these things, I suppose.
Counseling is very, very important in infertility throughout the stage, from day one.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being.
Thank you, Seema, for giving me the opportunity once more. Thank you. And there's a really 500 participants were there. Only 350 has been left, but still, with your permission, I can request, humble request I can make to all the participants. I am a contesting for the Vice President North Zone. So please.
Thank you. All the best. All the best.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ila. So we have
wonderful talk. It was a wonderful talk and wonderful question answers by asked by the audience. That para-ovarian cyst, because para-ovarian cysts are more prone for the torsion. So if they have not been removed, they may cause problems during the, if she has conceived or she has not conceived. So it is, if the para-ovarian cysts are the big cyst, they have to be removed. because para-ovarian cyst has got a long pedicles and they are more prone for the torsion in comparison to the ovarian cyst.
It depends on the size of the para-ovarian cyst.
Yeah.
Also
It was only 3 inch by 3 inches.
That can,
It's an excellent talk. Excellent talk.
Thank you.
No stone has been unturned. Dr.
One
Ela
more
Gupta,
question was there
congratulations.
about the latrose dose, no? 5 milligram maximum for 5 days. That is what?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yes.
There
So,
were 60 questions actually.
Ma'am,
Yes.
yes. Maybe we will have another webinar.
Very nice.
Yes,
And
We should
very,
just
very
shows
good
what
question.
your show is a hit, you know.
Very good questions, I must say.
because of your
Very good
presence,
question.
ma'am. So we shift to our panel now. And
Panel,
we have
yes.
panelists who are well versed and well known in the field of infertility. Most of the questions are just the recap of what Dr. Ela has talked, and maybe we will be modifying a little bit because we have the best lot, Dr. Meenakshi Dua, Dr. Priya, and Dr. Shalu. So we will have first question to Dr. Meenakshi. And some questions are very simple. So this is what, like, this is again an audience choice question. Given a choice, you would like to start CC on day 2 or day 5, Dr. Meenakshi?
Thank you, Dr. Seema, for the question. I would say the idea behind starting with either on day 2 or day 5 is earlier you start, more number of eggs will be recruited and more follicles will form. Late you start, less number of eggs will be recruited and less follicles you'll get. So if you have stimulated this patient before, you feel she'll form more eggs, start little later by 4th day or 5th day. But if you feel she's a poor responder, her age is more, her FSH is higher, start from day 2. So that should be the idea for using any of the ovulation induction drugs. Either day 2 or, like, according to that, you can decide which one to start with, which day to start with.
Right, it doesn't make much of the difference because if you start on day 5, you have normal luteal phase. If you start on day 2, you have a short luteal phase. Dr. Ela, would you like to add anything to it?
I think I agree with Meenakshi.
Yes.
So better as early you start, it is better.
It is
And
better.
the second thing is which I want to add here is I forgot to mention in my talk. See, invariably when you see the prescription papers of these clomiphene citrate or aromatase inhibitor, the progynova is added from day 1. I don't know why progynova is added from day 1. One side we are giving clomiphene citrate to reduce the estrogen to increase the FSH level. On the other side, why we are giving progynova along with the clomiphene citrate or aromatase inhibitor?
Yes, where there is poor endometrium, most of the people start, but it is better to
No,
start.
the endometrium will grow with the follicle.
Follicle,
if you are
yes.
adding progynova, you are not having the optimum follicular growth.
Definitely.
Because you are giving estrogen since day 1. So how will you get the FSH?
Okay, so next question is, can we add
We
progynova?
only add progynova if the endometrium does not develop later. So why in those cases to give clomiphene citrate?
Right.
Because clomiphene citrate is anti-estrogen.
Very right.
Don't give clomiphene citrate in such cases.
Induction is not indicated as clomiphene.
Progynova should be given only when the follicle size reaches 17-18 millimeter and still the endometrium is thin. If the endometrium is advancing very well with the clomiphene citrate, it's not that by adding progynova from day 1 we are increasing the estrogen level. Why we are increasing estrogen level from day 1 when we want the E2 level to be low and the FSH to be high?
Exactly.
So progynova should not be added either with the clomiphene citrate or
with any drug, ovulation induction drug. Yes. So next question to Dr. Priya. We have talked so much about metformin, and all said and done, metformin should be used in anovulating fertility in conjunction with clomiphene citrate wherever indicated. So once we start, when should we stop this metformin in pregnancy, Dr. Priya?
Dr. Seema, for the question. So metformin normally we do give in cases who are obese or who are initially with the resistance, who shows a resistance to clomiphene during ovulation induction drugs also. But nowadays the role, it's not being seen that latest ISHRI guidelines for ovulation induction says that metformin does not help in decreasing the resistance or does not help in recruiting more follicles. And once it is started, it has not been seen that initially it was being thought that metformin decreases the miscarriage rate and increases the live birth rates once it is continued through the first trimester. But nowadays it has been proven by various RCTs and meta-analysis that metformin does not help in improving the live birth rates or decreasing the miscarriage rate. So even if somebody started the metformin for the obese PCO, so they can stop it till the time as soon as the patient conceives after that. So there is no improved role of metformin in improving the pregnancy rates or decreasing the miscarriage rates.
Dr. Priya, there are studies where they have seen that there is hyperinsulinemia, and then metformin, there is a tissue cell culture, and when metformin is added,
Those were actually the low significant studies. They are very inconsistent and not a proper meta-analysis. So whatever meta-analysis we have about this metformin in the early pregnancy, the latest 2016 we have the latest meta-analysis. They say they have around 100 or 200 women. They are around 30 RCTs about that, and that says that metformin does not improve the live birth rates in those women.
So yeah, this is maybe the analysis, but what we do from our personal experience, and I would like Dr. Ila to share, because metformin drastically improves their pregnancy outcome in patients of recurrent abortions who are PCOS, and we have not put them on metformin earlier. So I want Dr. Ila to add in the question, the answer.
See, I have, in my experience, I found metformin to work for my PCOS patients. I have seen a drastic difference when I don't add the metformin to these PCO patients. Right. And when these patients, because I don't do deliveries or the obstetrics, so when the patients have gone to the obstetrician, and few patients, when they have stopped metformin
IUD
during pregnancy, they went into mid-trimester abortion.
Abortions, yes, very precise. We have so many cases.
There might be various causes for the abortion.
There might be various causes,
yes,
but
yes.
The same patient,
what drug went wrong and what help is
when
not.
When the same patient, they took metformin throughout, in the next pregnancy, it went very well without any complication. No gestational diabetes, no intrauterine growth retardation, nothing. So I don't know. I personally feel I don't stop metformin, and I ask my patient not to stop metformin till delivery.
Agreed. That is why we made this platform, because we go for RCTs, and when we look at the literature, 50% are for, 50% are against. And then you realize that there is nobody to answer your queries, your questions, because for our participants today, we will have the take-home message that metformin, wherever indicated, must be used, and it has to be continued even 3 months till pregnancy, Dr. Ila.
Yes.
All other panelists, Dr. Meenakshi, Dr. Chalu.
Yeah, I have done thesis on this. My PG thesis was on this metformin topic, and we found that it really helps. It should be continued at least for first 3 months of pregnancy, and after 12 weeks, do a GTT after stopping it for a week. If GTT is normal, then you can stop metformin, repeat GTT again at 24 weeks. If GTT comes abnormal, then restart metformin. That's how we follow this, and I still follow with all my pregnant patients. It works.
I normally give my patients till 20 weeks, do a GCT or GTT. If it is abnormal or they have a high family history of having a diabetes in them, then before I do a GCT, then only I have to stop my metformin. Otherwise, I continue with the metformin.
Majority that metformin should be
started. The practice and the meta-analysis and literature what we have.
That is why we have this platform, so we come to a conclusion, because guidelines are different for different people, but ultimately we go with the 4 metformin. So next question to Dr. Chalu. CC and metformin, like how Dr. Priya was concerned. So Dr. Chalu, now you have to tell which patients we should give CC and metformin, because literature says, only CC, only latrose, no metformin, only metformin. And then, in the end, you are left just confused, because one conference you go attend, they say, yes, it should be used. Second conference says you should not be using. But in your heart, you know that this patient, yes, he's doing wonderfully with metformin. So tell me.
Dr. Seema, if we see about PCO patient, PCO is basically the problem of insulin resistance. Okay, we all know the pathophysiology behind PCO. Whatever we say is insulin resistance, and to reduce insulin resistance, metformin is needed. In patients of PCO who are ovulating regularly, and we do a GCT, everything is okay, then I don't start metformin in them. But any other PCO with irregular cycles, obese, whether they are thin PCO or lean PCO, I do give them metformin.
Regardless of hormonal.
Regardless of hormone, because PCO, why does PCO happen? What is the pathology behind PCO? It is insulin resistance. If insulin resistance is behind the pathophysiology, either she goes through lifestyle modification where she does, but apart from that, if she's obese, again, it will help her in reducing the weight, plus it will help her in the insulin resistance. So these are the patients where I start metformin, and following that, because now CC is not the drug of choice for a PCO patient, I prefer to do a ovulation induction with letrozole.
Very right. Dr. Ila, would you like to add anything to this?
Oh, I agree with her.
Yes, very nicely answered, Dr. Shalu. Thank you. So we have next question. It's to Dr. Priya. This is not very significant. Why GnRH analogs to be given parentally, and which route is best?
The GnRH analog basically they are the substitutes here. They are biosynthesized where the peptide chains are basically replaced or with a different amino acids. So their bioavailability is like that. When they are used orally, they are not stable. So they just do have a fragmentation. They don't absorb, or they do work about that. So this is to be injected either subcutaneously, or there are other routes also. We have nasal spray also, have intramuscular routes also. So oral is not effective, but yeah, there is antagonist which was slowly that recent we have come one orally acting antagonist. We are coming up. There are studies going on, but usually what we have, they can be used either with a subcutaneous spray or intramuscular.
Right, Dr. Priya. So nasal route is supposed to be the best, but most of us are using subcutaneous route only. And next question to Dr. Meenakshi. For most of the time, antagonists came into practice, then disappeared, then came because there were lots of hue and cry. So are there any side effects of antagonists that you have come across, or you feel it should be like before prescribing?
No, ma'am.
You are not audible properly. What?
No.
Dr. Meenakshi?
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. No, ma'am, I have not come across any side effects of the antagonist. I feel it is one of the safest one to use, even an antagonist protocol to say. The dose is so low, and I have never come across any, other than very rarely patient might get a little rash while taking the injection, but that is not in all the patients, rarely in some of the patients. Otherwise, I have not come across any of those side effects. We are not giving it for long term. It is short acting, works only for 24 hours.
Okay, given a choice, what will you prefer, antagonist or analog, Dr. Meenakshi?
Antagonist protocol.
You go for antagonist. Okay, that we
Yeah.
have actually question then. Dr. Ila, would you like to add anything to this?
See, side effects, I have not observed any side effect with the antagonist. In my practice, the patient, sometimes they complain of itching at the injection site. But if you go through the literature, then they've mentioned about the vomiting and all kind of the reactions, allergic reactions. I don't know, what about the panel? Have they experienced any side effects with the gonad antagonist?
No.
Except for the local reaction.
Only local, yes, itching and all.
Ma'am, but
and
I don't know, there are one or two patients who, in spite of antagonists, they rupture their follicles. These are the poor responders. Antagonists in the poor responders are sometimes not able to prevent the LH surge. So this is one or two
dose
poor
is less
responders.
for them probably.
So whatever it is, but again, to put 0.25 is the dose which we normally use for every patient. Even in the overweight, they do not say you increase the doses. But somehow in the poor responders, antagonists somewhere, we have to be careful about antagonists. That's the problem.
Okay. So next question to Dr. Shalu. We were talking about LH. I think Dr. Ila has covered actually everything, but important functions of LH if we talk. And on the other hand, if I want to ask you, would you recommend any time, just pure recombinant LH for your patients?
Dr. Seema, when I was doing my FNB, so my teachers never believed in LH, recombinant LH.
Not audible. Dr. Shalu, you're not audible.
Kind of LH they use for the patients. But yes, I would like to use LH in my patients who are hypo. I'm not just 1 minute.
Okay. Dr. Ila?
Am I audible now?
You are now audible.
One second.
Yes.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes.
So I like to use LH in my patients like hypogonadotropic hypogonadism or a poor responders or the patients in which we saw poor response. Started doing my stimulation. They had a very poor recruitment of the follicles. So maybe in the next cycle, I like to either the same cycle add LH or recruit in the next cycle start the LH from day 1, day 2 itself.
Dr. Ila?
For the IUI cycles, I preferred HMG over FSH. And for IVF cycles, my protocol is first 3 days I give FSH. And then from 4th day onwards, I switch on to HMG. Because I have seen good response, good folliculogenesis by adding HMG from day 4, day 5 of the stimulation cycles. And as we go through the physiology also, the LH is important for folliculogenesis and for prevent the follicle atresia. And that 4th or 5th day of the stimulation is very important for the follicle to undergo, to prevent them going undergoing atresia.
Yes,
So
this is
because earlier, like this was a few years back, when in 1 or 2 cases I've used FSH throughout the cycle, I didn't find the response good. So since then, I don't give FSH throughout the cycle. I add HMG from 4th, 5th day of the stimulation.
Yeah, nowadays they say that HMG you can start even PCOS with raised LH also you can start because FSH starts going down after 5 or 6 days. You need both FSH and LH for induction. So in poor responders, yes, definitely, as Dr. Shalu said, that LH does help. And I think we can clarify more with the next question.
The second thing is, here Seema, I want to add one more thing. Now, there are studies which says that if you are giving throughout FSH gonadotropins, then more chances of premature rise of progesterone hormone.
Right.
So that may affect the endometrium also. And if you are adding, so there are many studies now, many studies by Filicori why there is a premature rise of progesterone hormone. So if you want to reduce the incidence of premature rise of progesterone, it's better to add HMG and to reduce your FSH after a certain time of stimulation.
Yeah. Even the home quality, they have studied that meiosis stage 2 are not there when you are not adding LH and premature luteinization, all like LH is must. So the question, Dr. Priya, what is LH ceiling? Dr. Ila has said, but just to recapitulate, what is LH ceiling? And here again, we will discuss something about LH more. So what is LH ceiling?
So like there's in the concept of folliculogenesis that there is also we require a specific LH window is there, and we require a specific LH threshold level for a follicle to grow, and that is normally required in the late folliculogenesis phase, because LH helps it at the 2-cell gonadotropin theory that it helps at the granulosoma cell level also, and it provides the substrates for estrogen formation also. So, but at the particular level that, as Dr. Ila has already shared in her slide, that there is a level of LH beyond that. If the LH goes high, then it causes follicular atresia and it causes dysfunction of the folliculogenesis. So we should not, that's why we said that in the first go we should not start too much of LH, or recombinant LH should not be added, preferably in the first 2 or 3 days of the follicular stimulation, because it might lead to follicular atresia if a high level of LH is there during the first phase of folliculogenesis.
So I would like to add another question. See, if I had a patient who had 220 LH, so how do I proceed for that patient? She was obese and she had this high LH, and that was the time when we were not doing AMH. It was almost 15 years back. So what is the protocol to be followed in such a patient? How can we counsel that patient? She did conceive and she had a baby, but I just want the opinion from the panelists that what should be done for such patients with high LH.
So it all depends.
She was not for IUI, she was not for IVF, she was just a normal patient where we screen and we say that LH is high. So how do we proceed?
Actually, other hormonal profile also to be correlated with that. That how much was the
everything other whatever we could do at that time, it was normal.
no estradiol and progesterone was perfectly high for the day 2 whatever, because it first it has to be checked at which day of the cycle the LH was done.
Second
Because
day,
at
day 2.
day 2, then there might be if she has been a PCO case, it is a known factor that LH is at times high in these type of cases with the hyperandrogenemia. So in those cases, initially what was the protocol there to give ocipils to suppress the LH and to start the stimulation after that. But nowadays it also has been seen that previous pre-cycle OCP priming it is not helpful in the stimulation in these type of cases. Now what we do normally is that if day 2 LH is high, we can just give them an antagonist dose for 2 or 3 days. It makes the LH down too quickly for the first 2-3 days.
200 will not come down with 3 doses, and I've never seen 200 in a PCOS.
That's why I'm saying that it should be checked. What was the reason?
Ovarian failure.
We had just given her only metformin. We kept on giving, and every
6 to 8 months it will work.
Eating a LH, and it came down to 90, 27, and ultimately she conceived. And it was just that time we didn't have latrose also. Just with clomipure and metformin, she conceived. No HSS, nothing. Dr. Ela, you would like to add anything?
Because with 200 LH, I will think she'll have a LH producing ovarian cancer or something. My mind will go that way.
This must be a lab error also. That 200 even I don't have not find in any of the patients.
It was 220, and she was very fat, and she almost, I think, 5th or 6th month of we had continued for that long, and she had ultimately delivered a male baby 2.2 kg, and she had leaking after just 8 months completed, and no complication in between. I was just trying to emphasize that metformin does help. RCT
Yes.
Dr. Ela, anything you want to say?
It brings down AMH also. AMH and LH both will be reduced and ovulation will start. But it takes 3 to 6 months.
High LH means she must be anovulatory, must be having anovulatory cycles.
Right.
So now, if the day 2 LH is so high, whatever stimulation drug you're going to give, it's not going to work. So the first important thing is with such high LH and PCO patient with anovulatory cycles, put her on metformin, insulin sensitizing agent, and put her on contraceptive pills. Now those contraceptive pills, the function of the metformin and contraceptive pill here is to reduce the LH. And by the time like 1 cycle or 2 cycle, it will reduce the LH. The metformin will also start working. Metformin will help in reducing the insulin resistance and the LH. And then after 2 cycles or 3 cycles, depending upon the LH value, how much it has come down, you can add on the stimulation.
Lifestyle modification which we was told, like we had some patients in series which I can recollect, just reducing their weight and adding metformin, and they all are conceiving beautifully. And OCP, you are right, but when their obese patients are coming to us, normally somewhere I feel, that I'm not giving them OCPs. So Dr. Meenakshi, you wanted to say something? Yes.
No, yeah, I agree with Dr. what Ela suggested, that yes, we do give OC pills for 2 months just to, and get a faster relief. Right. Otherwise, metformin will take long time, and at least 6 months of trial should be given before we say metformin is not working. Most of the time it works.
Yes, agreed. Totally agreed with you. And the next question is to Dr. Shalu. What is FSH window? No voice, Dr. Shalu, no voice. You're not audible.
Unmute yourself, Dr. Shalu. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yes. Hi. You can hear me? Achha. What I think it was Dr. Ela's 3rd or 4th slide in which you showed the graph in which the primordial follicles come into a pre-antral stage, antral stage, and then they become the pre-ovulatory stage. So for each follicle, we have a FSH threshold that if the FSH which it is exposed to increases above that window, then it starts responding to the FSH and it starts growing. So this is said to be the FSH window, and this is what we take advantage of when we are doing ovulation inductions for IUIs or the IVF. In IUI, we don't exceed too much our FSH window, whereas in IVF, we exceed our FSH window to a greater height so that there is more recruitment of the follicles. So for the FSH window, we have all the ovulation induction drugs, the letrozole, CC, all of these, in fact, increases the FSH inside a body and hence increasing the FSH amount which is available for the pre-antral follicles for them to grow.
So very right. So the period of FSH supply over the threshold is the FSH window. So just a question that normal patient, we are not talking about IVF or IUI. Patient has come, she's 30 years old and she has high FSH. So what is the maximum level that you take, that beyond this I'm not going to take for normal treatment, and this is the level I will take for normal treatment and I will give this treatment, Dr. Shalu? 10, 15, 20, what is your
Normally I take 20 is my cutoff. So above 20, I know that the chances of patient conceiving or having an abnormal oocyte is much higher. But I have patients who had a FSH of 25 or more, around 25, who are very keen on having a conception on their own. So in there, I try to bring the FSH down, and in case any follicles come up, and this, my treatment is also based on what I see, if I see any antral follicle or not, because once you reach about around 25, the number of antral follicles, what you see is just 1 or maximum 2 there.
So what is the treatment protocol that you follow for your patients? It's
for my patients in which who have a high FSH, I normally start them with the estradiol, because we know that the estradiol goes for give a negative feedback to the brain. So when I start an estradiol, it goes and give a negative feedback, bringing the FSH down. So we give a HRT, try to bring the FSH down, and then see if in day 2 or day 3 how much is the FSH, and then decide on the.
You're giving only estradiol?
No, I'll give it to the Meprate later for the withdrawal.
Dr. Ela, please add something to it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So why not give simple OC pill to her again for reducing her FSH?
OCP pill will suppress her further. OCP pill will suppress her. HRT doesn't suppress her so much. It will only bring. OCP is going to suppress because both the estradiol and the Meprate. Plus, it says that OCP is also detrimental for the oocyte quality as well as the endometrial quality, giving the OCPs for a long time.
And what will you give for stimulation?
For the poor responders, for low AMH and high FSH, it's better to give estradiol withdrawal.
Right. And what will you give for stimulation?
It is, the patient is for IUI or she's for IVF. If it's an IVF, it's going to be a this low dose protocol for me. Depends upon the number of antral follicles what I'm going to see her. Okay. So it will be either CC or 150, or it is one the protocols which I normally like in these patients.
Dr. Ela, what should be the ideal protocol for her? If she's not for IVF, she's not for IUI, and she's just 30 years old, rest all factors are normal, so she wants normal conception. So what are the best ovulating?
Give a gonadotropins HMG.
HMG or FSH?
No, HMG.
Okay. And next question is to Dr. Priya now. I think we've discussed also what is the role of DHEAs or testosterone, or if anybody in the panel is using testosterone patches in poor ovarian responders. Just the personal experience, Dr. Priya.
So these are all actually adjuvant therapy which we use in poor responders, and in those cases who have a low reserve and are very keen for their own eggs, so we do give them a 3 months of prior stimulation with DHEA 75 milligram per day, as Dr. Ela has already told. And I also used gel, testosterone gel. I used androgel in the name of androgel, 12.5 milligram per day, at least 2 months prior to the stimulation. And before just starting the stimulation, I used to stop the gel. But personally speaking, I find good response with DHE as compared to gel. So in gel, there was actually an incidence of breakthrough bleeding also I found in few cases. So in my personal experience, I do put them on DHEA for at least 2 months till the time for the if they have a poor reserve for that before stimulation.
Dr. Ela also said 25 milligram TDS. We are using 80 milligram per day.
75 milligram.
75.
Dr. Meenakshi, Dr. Shalu, you would like to add anything in this? Are you using testosterone patches?
I've used
normally
testosterone gel, but it did not work well. DHEAS, we check the DHEAS levels in the patient. If it is normal, I don't start DHEAS, but if it is low, then yes, I give it for 3 months and then again check AMH and then start the treatment.
Not giving empirically, like in patient with
No,
low AMH, they say you give.
no.
We have given to
I,
patients and they have responded beautifully to DHAS. We don't do DHAS, just empirically. AMH is 1.1. We start with DHAS 80 milligram for 2 months, and they have given very good results. Dr. Shalu, you would like to add?
I do give testosterone patches, but this is in the prior cycle. So I feel because testosterone has been, there have been studies, they say it is useful. So patients should not feel that I have, although there are some patients who respond very well to the testosterone patches, some patients I don't see much response in the number of increase in the antral follicle. But still, to be honest, because testosterone is coming in a big way and lots of RCTs are showing improvement, I normally do give it to all my poor responders. Have a benefit rather than having no zero.
It should be given in a previous cycle only. Dr. Ela, you would like to add anything to it?
My experience with DHEA and androgens, I have not found any significant difference after using these.
Okay.
I think it is only for the patient's psychological thing that you have given something to them. Because I have tried in so many patients all these things.
Right.
Ultimately, the number of oocyte recovery is the same. This is my experience actually.
Even AMH.
So I am not very.
No, you are right, because we've done AMH for these patients after 3 months also, and it is 0.65, so it is just 0.6.
Even if it is 0.7 reaches to 0.9, how does it matter?
It doesn't reach to the 0.9 also, but younger patients, if we give, then they have conceived. Like, I have some
younger would.
Actually, what happened at times when you put on DHEAs, at times people do conceive also naturally. But what worked well, is it a placebo or just effect of DHEA? You don't know about that.
Very difficult to say. Yes, very right, Dr. Priya. And so, next question to Dr. Meenakshi. Sometimes we stimulate twice in a cycle, like for IVF also. So, what is your experience with the?
We have done few cycles of duostim in patients who were poor responders just to save on time and to collect the embryos. But personally, we did it does not increase the pregnancy rate. It only increases the number of eggs or the embryos we are getting. It is helpful if you've done one stimulation and you get good embryos and you plan to do PGS. So in those cases, you can do 2 or 3 stimulations back to back and collect some embryos, do PGS and then do transfer. Otherwise, personally, just to increase the chance of pregnancy, I don't think it really helps.
Right, very right, Dr. Meenakshi. Dr. Ela, would you like to add anything?
No, I am not in favor of stimulating twice in one cycle unless and until the patient is a cancer patient and wants to freeze her oocyte or embryos. Otherwise, I don't feel any emergency in stimulating twice in one cycle. The patient can wait for 15 days.
Yes, very correctly explained by Dr. Meenakshi that you might get eggs, but you're not getting pregnancy. So ultimately, the purpose is futile, and you're just wasting your and patient's time. Next question to Dr. Shalu. Just this is the last question. For a normogonadotrophic patient in IVF cycle, I think I'd ask Dr. Meenakshi also. So, what are we doing now? Agonist or antagonist? What is your favorite?
I'm well versed with both the things. It depends upon what is my cohort. Sometimes my cohort is very uneven. In the normogonadal patients, the few follicles are large, few are small. Then I go for an agonist protocol. Otherwise, the antagonist is the that I prefer to do antagonist. So, and secondly, plus I like to see what have they gone for a previous IVF cycle. What was the recruitment? What are the embryos? There are a lot of patients who have normal responders who come with a failed cycle. If they've gone with the antagonist cycle, then I change the cycle to agonist cycle and then see. But for the normal responder, you can take any protocol, whatever is the choice of the fertility specialist who's doing it.
Dr. Ela, what is your take on this?
Yeah, antagonist.
Antagonist. So today we had almost 500 participants and there are still 71 questions waiting in the chat box. But I think Dr. Ela really justified it and I am really happy this was like, you know, revision class for me, like what you read, then you discuss, and then you reach to a conclusion. And this was like a good teacher preparing a lecture, and you really, really did the wonderful job. And I will,
Thank you.
before I invite Dr. Poonam Jain, I would really like to thank all my participants, especially Dr. Ela, then Anita Kant ma'am, Dr. Yashodhara, Dr. Vikranti, Dr. Priya, Dr. Meenakshi, and Dr. Shalu. I know everybody is so busy, but everybody took out time also and interest also. And I'm sure that this talk must have been helpful to all the participants. And this is what we are planning. You know, we can talk our heart out. Maybe we are wrong, we are right, but at least we reach to a conclusion that what we are actually doing, because the foreign studies are totally different. What we have in India, what is available to us, the resources, and what we can do best. This is what we are attempting at on every Friday. Today it was done on Thursday, because tomorrow we have a big FOGSI event happening on adolescent health. So may I request Dr. Poonam Jain to thank all the participants on behalf of our society. And more important thing is, I will request all the participants to join Indian Fertility Society, be the member. It is worth, and you will have so many bonanzas of these study episodes. And all the members, the seniors, are wonderful teachers. So may I request Dr. Poonam Jain?
Seema,
Thank you so much.
Seema, thank you so much. You have done a wonderful panel moderation. I was just listening to you. Very good questions and very good discussions by the panelists. I'm proud of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Poonam Jain is there?
Ma'am, she's not there right now.
She's not there.
Okay, and Dr. Vikranti, thank you so much. She was the tomboy girl, and now she's become such a beautiful, you know, Bollywood screen queen. And really happy to see you, Vikranti. So may I request Dr. Deepika on behalf of Jackson Pal to thank you, and thank you, Deepika ji and Team Jackson Pal, for all the wonderful arrangements.
Thank you.
Deepika. Request for Dr. Yashodhara ma'am that everybody should vote and support her.
Ma'am, we are really delighted to see that Dr. Mitra from past President Rewari Obs and Gynae Society from this Rewari Society, she has won in the elections as Chairperson Practical Obstetrics Committee. And congratulations goes to not only her, to the whole team of Dr. Seema Mittal as President of Rewari Obs and Gynae Society. Ma'am, many congrats to you that your team member has won this prestigious post. So, on behalf of Jackson Pal, ma'am, makers of Cystilia M, Lycored Preg Sachet, I'm Dr. Deepika Chabra along with my teammates, and we are really all thankful to all the experts present here today who have been sharing immense knowledge with us today. Dr. Ela, Dr. Yashodhara, Dr. Anita Kant, and all the panelists, ma'am. So thank you so much, and we are also appreciative of the presence of all the attendees. With your unending support, attendees, we will be able to go a long way in knowledge sharing. So thanks so much from all of us, and it's a goodbye from all of us. See you in the next webinar.
Because of you, I could see Deepika after a long time. It's nice, pleasure to see you after a long, long time.
Yes, ma'am, many years.
Many years, I suppose, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Seema Di.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.